All right, welcome to today's lesson. Now, as from our last week's lesson, we're talking about how to create and use classes. So we ran the tutorial last week. Now, for this week, we are going to dive into our second tutorial, which is how to connect your user interface to a database. That is, we are going to work our example on two database management systems. That is database that is created using Access, Microsoft Access database management system, and then a database that is created using the built-in SQL Server Express edition. So from our assignment that we took home, I think 2 weeks ago, at least everybody should have a certain database of a certain schema that was created either in Access or in SQL. In fact, in this database, we are supposed to have 3 tables. The database is supposed to be, I think, contact DB. Then the tables would be either, I think, persons TB, then we will have calls TB, and then we will have messages TB. So the logic here is that we are going to create something like your contact manager on your phone, where you would have calls coming in, you have messages coming in. So each message will come from a certain contact in your phone, and each call will come from a certain contact. So we could basically use this to practice some of the things that we discussed when we're talking about Windows database applications. So, and how to link user interfaces to databases that have one table, and then databases that have multiple tables or multiple related tables. So we are going to do this in stages. That is, every lesson we are going to add to the complexity of what we are doing. So in today's lesson, it is going to be on the basics, how to create some of the classes that we spoke about, how to create objects from them, how to work with some of the properties of these classes that are used to work with some of these database systems. So, and as I mentioned, our focus is on these two. That doesn't mean that these two are the only ones that are supported. Database, Microsoft Visual Studio actually support quite a number of database management systems. And mostly all you need to do is just download a library, like a plugin, and then just plug it in, and then you'll be good to go. So today's tutorial, we are going to use the hard coding, or we are going to hard code our connection to this database. And then hopefully a week or 2 weeks from now, we are going to use the wizard so that we'll see the differences of how these things are used. Let me just show you the type of program that we are going to develop. This is just a single interface program where we would have a contact information that is displayed in text boxes and daytime tickets and combo boxes. And then we will have another set of buttons that we will use to navigate these records that are in this database. And then we would be able to manipulate this database by adding new records to this database by doing something like this to add the records, cancel. And then by also updating existing database or existing records that are already in the database, we can delete some of these records if we think we don't want them, and so on and so forth. So those are the things that we would do. So we would use these classes that we discussed in our lecture to actually accomplish this. So we navigate. So we first of all have to create functions and sub-procedures to actually connect our data to our database, or connect our user interface to our database. And then we navigate this. Of course, this is not the only way out. We could have just added a data grid view to do this, but we are going through this to basically give us enough code that we can use for our project, to give us a lot of different ways that we can accomplish this, so that as you undertake your group project, you would have enough experience or enough examples to use to accomplish whatever application that you are trying to develop in terms of your project work. So that is basically it. And then, of course, apart from being able to navigate and then being able to manipulate the data, we could also search through the database and to find out if a particular record exists in the database. And if it does, then we basically display it for the user to see. Let's see, what don't we have? Let's put 4 here. Then it will bring in something like this. So that is all what we are going to do. So we are going to start by, first of all, designing a user interface and putting all these things in place. And then after that, we start coding all these buttons one after the other to see how it will actually work. So this video is most likely going to be broken into smaller pieces, so that as you watch, you would have to pay attention to the order in which they come, so that you can fully understand. As the custom is in our class, we usually dedicate the first part of the video to designing the user interface. We are just going to go through that because of some of the new groups that are joining us this semester. Just for their sake. Other than that, I would have pre-designed this user interface and then just come in and then we'll start the code, because I expect everybody to be conversant with all the things that have been used on this user interface, because last semester we made extensive use of them. So let's start our work by launching Visual Studio. So you can see these are all text boxes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 text boxes. Then we have a combo box. Then we have a date time picker. Then all these are also labels, right? So these are all buttons. And then this is also a button. But of course, we could use a menu here to accomplish this task. So when we start, we could use a menu to try to solve that. Instead of putting a button here to search, we could search using a menu and stuff like that. So let's proceed to our Visual Studio. Let's start, create our new project and see how it goes. So we create our new Windows Form application. We give it whatever name we want to give it. So class, we could talk about contact app or contact manager app. So that is the name of our project, contact manager app. So I leave it at the default storage. Just make sure Windows Form application is selected. We make sure Visual Basic is selected, and then we click on OK to start our new project. Now, as we go, as I indicated, we are going to try and design 2 forms. Of course, as the example goes, I will be switching between the Access database and then SQL database. So if you are using Access database, then you continue to follow only the Access database and stuff like that. So let's, as I said, we'll first of all start by designing our user interface, which is made up of, I think, about 3 group boxes. and each group box actually satisfy certain. So let's add those group boxes from our toolbox. So we look for group boxes. So let's go to maybe common. Under common, we are not able to find, so let's just search for group box. So we add 3 group boxes to the project. Right, so 3 group boxes. Okay, so I just 2. Okay, so these are the group boxes. We'll add them, so I'll pull these 2 here, and then I would pull that up here. So for us not to be forced to move this later on, let us add a menu item. So let's add a menu strip. Add the menu strip. Added it into the container. I'm supposed to step out of the container before we add that. Okay, so our menu strip is here. So let's just add the various items so that we don't mess up our user interface after we design it. Because if we leave it and then we add the menu item later on, we might be forced to move some of our group boxes down. That might distort, or we'll be doing double work. So that's why I just wanted to add the the menu strip from the beginning, so that we'll know where it ends. Then we can shift our items as we go. So we check action, and then we say maybe search. Okay, so we just add these 2. So you can see as soon as we add, then we need to shift this group box here down a little bit, just so that it shouldn't be too crampy at the side. So we start by changing the text property of this. So we have contact information, right? So we need to look at it to be sure that this place is not too crowded, just so that if it's too crowded, we just move it down a little bit, just so that our user interface may look a bit cleaner than it is, than it was, to avoid a whole lot of overcrowding at this site. So usually slick user interfaces are not overcrowded. Now, the next thing we need to do is to add the labels and then the text boxes. So we add the labels and the text boxes according to the number of columns we have in our person table. So we are going to actually display the person table here. Now, remember, we are working based on the database that we are all supposed to create in the assignment. So everybody is just supposed to load that. So I would indicate where we need to do this as we go on. We need to copy the access into a certain folder to make our work easier. As for the SQL database, we know where the server is located, so we can easily always point to it without any issues. So the next thing is to add those labels about right label. I think we need to add about okay, let's add as many as we can, so that later we can remove the access one. Okay, so we have, so from our table we have person table, and we have the person ID we have the first name, we have the last name, we have the gender, and so on and so forth. So we would create those ones just to be sure that we are getting everything right. So let's have the contact ID here. Then you have the first name. So we are changing the text property. So we have the first name. Then have the last name. Then you have the gender. No, not gender. Then we will have date of birth, email. Remember here, you don't have to necessarily bring them in the order in which they are in the table. It is not really necessary to bring them in that order. There are certain instances in the code that you'll be required to actually maintain the order that is in the table, but this is not one of them. So you can arrange them in any way that makes sense to you, right? So later on, when we get there, I will touch on that a little bit. So date of birth, so I'm just writing them in case they are not in the order in which they are in the table. Don't force yourself to rearrange them like that. Just arrange them in a way that makes sense to you. So after date of birth, then we have email. Like have it in the small letters. So after email, then we would have I think phone number and details and address. So we would have let's say phone number. Address. Then let's just copy one of them. The address we would have, so you can just copy it by just holding down control and dragging it. So you have a copy created for you. That's what I just did. So after address, we have details. Okay. So that is basically how we would have our items. So we can quickly arrange them nicely in a way that at least try to get them to. So I'm just trying to have this line here, align them nicely for me so that I won't have a very crooked user interface. Okay, so you have that. Okay, so this is what we have. So let's go ahead and add the text boxes to our interface. So this guy here will be a text box. This guy here, text box. I'm supposed to move there. So this guy here, text box. Phone number also a text box. Email also a text box. Date of birth will not be a text box. So here we use things like this. So we're trying to them so that they will look a way that is presentable. So this is how I choose to design mine. So you feel free to design your interface to look any way you like once it makes sense. So address, for instance, we could make it into a multi-line text box by clicking on this arrow here and then clicking on this. So when we click on the text box, the arrow up here, we click on it, and then we check this checkbox here that says multi-line. So once we do that, we can expand this text box into any way we like. All right. So the address would have multiple lines, so that you can put the street name and whatever things you want to put there. All right. So the same thing is done for the detail. So the detail, we also click on this arrow and select a multi-line. Then we could easily just put it here so that at least we could, if we decide to add a story about how we meet or how we met the contact, we could put it, all the description of the contact and stuff like that, we could put it here. So for the gender and then the date of birth, we would put, for the gender, we put the combo box. So sometimes some people prefer to use mutually exclusive radio buttons to actually specify gender, right? So we could do that, but we decided to use a combo box. There's nothing wrong with that also. So you just make a choice and stick by it. So here we take a date time picker. The date time picker, place it right here. Okay, so these are all the controls that we would need for this site. So the next thing we need to do is to get the items here that we will use for our navigation. So here we would input as the text, put navigation, right? And here, I think we named it actions. Right, those are actions you can take. So here, we have just a little box here. That is for the 4 buttons that we will use. That's it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these are the buttons that we have. These are 6 buttons here. All right. Of course, we could add these actions here to the menu strip that we added, but we decided to put them here. So you can decide what you want to do. If you want to add these to the menu items up there, that is your prerogative. So you can always decide to design your user interface in a way that you feel would improve the ease of use of your software. So you guys took a course in human-computer interaction, so you can make use of some of the things that you learn in that class here. So just want to move them down a little bit. So I highlight it and I just use the key down on my keyboard to move them down. So here also we arrange them this way. So so this one will be the first, this one will be previous, this one will be next, and this one will be last. All right, so I just use the key on my keyboard. That is, I use the bar. So in the text property, I use the bar, right? So the bar, and then I use a less than sign, right? So that is the kind of thing I did. There are no any symbols that are like that. So here I'll use the one less than sign. And then when I came here in the text property, I use the greater than sign. And then here in the text property of this button, I use the greater than sign and then the bar. So something like this. All right. So if you want, you could just highlight all of them and make it bold by going to the font and then clicking on these here. And then you can change it to bold font, right? By just doing this. So this is what I did on the user interface you saw earlier on. Now the next thing is to change the text properties of this. So here we have add, right? And we add new if you want to, but you could just say add if that is just to make the user interface less wordy, right? Just remove a lot of the unnecessary words as possible so that your user interface does not become too saturated with a lot of text, right? So usually, or under normal circumstances, we could have used images for this. So we create our bitmaps and then we just import them into our project and then we use them on the buttons and we use them as buttons and other things, right? So it will give our program a much more professional look, but this one also doesn't look bad. So here we'll have add and then we'll have delete. Second one. And then we will have commit. So when we get to the coding, we'll get to know what each of these buttons for. So add here, basically we just clear all the data from these text boxes so that the user can enter the data in here. When he's done, then you click on submit or commit to basically write the data that is entered here permanently into the database. All right. So delete, at least is self-explanatory. So this and this will work together to actually insert new record into the database. So we'll work on the update also. So here we'll update particular record. So when we click on update, the same thing, it will give us the chance to update any of these fields. When we are done updating, we click on save to save the new record or to save the updated records into the database. Now, at any point in time, when we are adding or we are updating, we can always cancel. That is, we stop what we're doing, right? So once we cancel, and basically it brings us to the state in which the application was in before you started the editing. Okay, so here commit have to be long, a little bit, delete also have to be a little long, and then add, okay, something like this. Okay, so this is what we have. So the next thing we need to do is to make sure we change the name properties of all this, and then we configure all of them in a way that will help us write code that we would understand later. All right. So here we change the name properties of these objects here. And then we change the name properties of these objects here as well. So here we would have, let's look for the name property and change it to txt ID, something like this. So because it's a text box, so it will prefix with txt, and then f name, So usually let's have this one also as capital. So we have here txt L name, and here since it's a combo box, we will have CB CMB as a combo box, gender, and then we'll have date time picker, that is date time picker date of birth. All right. Then we will have txt email. Now you need to remember all these names that you are giving to all these text boxes and all these controls. Because when we get to the code, depending on the names we gave to this, we'll change our code to reflect that. All right. These names I'm writing might not necessarily be those names that you would write. So you choose whatever names you like, but then just make sure when it gets the code, you are able to remember what name you gave to what control or what object. So txt phone, and then txt address, and we have txt details. All right, so that ends this. But of course, this guy here, we call it BTN, that is button first. So when you click on it, it should show you the first record in the list. And this one, when you click on it, it should take you to the previous record. So we have BTN previous, something like this. So we have BTN, show that it's a button. And then we have next. So clicking on that button will take you to the next record. And then we have BTN last. So you click on this button to take you to the last item. So we have BTN add. So that is what button we will use to clear these records off before we now enter our new records. And when we are done, we hit on commit. So this and this work hand in hand, this and this work hand in hand, and they all work hand in hand with this cancel here. So at any moment until you commit or until you save, you can always cancel. Now delete works in isolation. So when you click on delete, whatever record is the current record would be identified and deleted from the database. So we have BTN add. Here we have BTN delete. Then we will have BTN commit. And then we have BTN update. Oops. Now just clicked on it double by mistake. So we go back to the name. All right. Okay, that's it. So BTN cancel. And then BTN save. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is to go and try and configure these guys. So I made my contact ID field auto-generated in both the SQL database and in the Access database. So I gave default value, auto-generated value. So it will just generate a certain monotonically increasing integer for every record that is added. So I use that as my key. In databases, we call that a surrogate key. It is just an arbitral number that we generate and then we use for as a primary key. So I generated those items anytime a new record is added. So I don't need to add it or I don't need to edit it at all. So in that case, I would make this guy here read only. So the user can only see it, the user cannot edit it, the user cannot do anything about it. All right, because I made it auto-generated. It's just anytime you add the record, it is added by itself. The user doesn't add it. All right, so because of that, I don't also want the user to edit it, just to cause you trouble by updating it in a way that will cause trouble for your database. All right, so I'm using a surrogate key. Of course, we could have used maybe the user's phone number as a primary key, or we could use his social security number as a primary key, but those are usually pieces of information we don't get from people when we are taking their contact, right? So usually we will use surrogate keys for this kind of transaction. But if you were developing a system for GTUC students, then you would think about using their ID numbers as primary keys. So in that case, the user will have to enter his ID number. So it cannot be auto-generated in that case. All right. So, but there's no difference. Whatever database you are using, if you need to make this, if you need to make a user enter this data, all you need to do, just don't make it read only, just leave it so that the user will enter the data. So in the code, you just indicate it as the first column in your table. So there's no issue. So you have enough code to imitate this. All right. So here I will make it read only equals true. So I look for read only. So here I grouped it. So let me make it alphabetical. So once I make it alphabetical, I can go to R somewhere and find read only. Then I change it to true. So in that case, the user will not be able to edit this. All right. Okay. So that is for that. Then we come to the gender combo box. Now in the combo box, we would like to indicate two different genders. That is, the user will have to select whether he's a male or female. So in order to do that, we make sure the gender is selected. We go to properties and look for items. Once we find items, we look here and we find collection. So we click on this three dots here, and then you open this window. So here we can input any list of items we want to show up in our combo box. So here we'll have, male, you hit enter, and then female, right? And you hit enter. So in this case, we have just these two in here. But if we want one of them to be always in here, it's either we go and look for the selected item, or we just look for the text property, right? So once we find the text property, we can enter anything that we want to be selected by default. So we can put in the female, if that is what we want to be selected by default. So we hit enter, so the female will appear in our combo box. So anytime you run this application, female will be the default selection, something like that. All right. So apart from that, we will come here and we will look for our, we configure this datetime picker. Usually the most important thing is to pick the type of date that you want. And in most of these instances, I am always more comfortable working with the short date. But if you want, so this is the long date, which is the day, then the name of the day, then the date of the day, then we have the month, and then we have the year. And then that is it. But then we always I'm more comfortable working with the normal short date. So we'll go and then we'll configure all that. So it will also allow us to choose how far the date should go, right? The minimum date and the maximum date. So that if you are talking about maybe people's date of birth, at least people who are living, you are gathering data about people who are alive. Maybe you won't go past maybe the 18th, I mean, the 20th century too much, right? So you can specify those kind of things in the datetime picker property. So let's go and look for some of them. Let's first of all look for the format. So the format here, they indicated that it is long. So this is why you are seeing this Tuesday, 27th of July, 2021 in here. But I would want the short. And when you click on the short, you see that it is a very short date, very nicely easy to use. So you have 27th July 2021 separated by the slashes. At least it looks better for me. So you decide which one you want, whether you want the date time picker to display the long age, the long date or the short date. So you just look for the format. So I found the format somewhere here. Where's the format supposed to be? I just found format somewhere here not long ago. I didn't choose datetime picker. So once you choose a datetime picker, you find format here. So if you choose it to long, so this is what you get. If you choose it to short, this is what you get. You can choose it. You can choose only time, right, and stuff like that, or you can customize how you want your datetime picker to look. So I choose short, and then I move on to set the maximum and then the minimum date. Let's look for, this is the maximum date, 9998, right? Which is a very, very long time to come. But of course, usually the maximum date, if you are talking about the ages of people, it's always better to leave it because you don't know how long your software is going to live. Maybe your software will be used for 100 years, who knows? If not, if you limit the maximum age, what happens is after some time, they won't be able to use it any longer. But of course, 9998 is also a bit on the high side. We will leave it as it is. The minimum age is 1753, right? Of course, I wouldn't leave this because I'm talking about date of birth of people who are alive and using phones. So in that case, I would rather maybe bring it closer to maybe the maybe 1900, right? Something around that time. At least that will make our work a bit easier for us. So maybe we look for, yes, maybe 1900, right? At least even that is still a very big issue, but at least we can leave it there. So depending on what you want to do at any time, you would decide what exactly you want to do. So the value, we can pick whatever value we want inside that text box at any point in time. Now you can see here, it is keeping today's date and then the current time. So you can always leave it as I did. or you can change it to any date at all you want. All right, so that's with the date time picker. Apart from that, all the other things, we can leave it. And if there's anything I've forgotten to add, when we get to the code, I'll come back and I'll add it and we'll proceed. Other than that, we consider it to be fine. So that is the first part. So we need to change this also, the text property of the form. So we call it maybe contact manager app. So we will name this Microsoft Access Database, right? So we will name this Microsoft Access Database. So we will design something like that also for SQL database, right? So that we would know exactly what we are doing anytime we open any of these windows. So what we can do is we could just go to project and add a new form to our project, and then we call this what's the name, contact SQL DB contact app, right? So that is what name I have chosen to give to the second form. Remember, I said we are going to have two forms. One form will be used for Access Database. The other form will be used for SQL Server Database. So in that case, at least we could do all of them side by side so that you will see the differences that you have to introduce if you are using Access Database, and the differences you have to introduce if you are using SQL Server Database. So once we type in the SQL database contact application, we just make sure that the Windows form is selected, and then we hit enter, and then we expand it nicely. And then what I will do is I will just go here and copy all the things that are there. So how did I do that? All I did was just make sure something is selected on that user interface, and I hold Control and I hold All. So Control A, then I select all, and then I click on Control C, right? Then I come here and I click on Control V, right? To just bring everything. So here, I make sure something is selected. I hit Control A to select everything on the user interface. And then I click on Control C to copy everything. And then I go to my new form and then click on the new form and hit on Control V. Just the same shortcut as you usually would use with Microsoft Office applications, right? Microsoft Office Word or Excel or whatever. So you just hold Control and then you move. So when you come, you bring it to the new form, you just rearrange it in a way that you feel makes sense to you. Then you can proceed with that. So this is what I have achieved at the end of the day. So now I have two forms, but of course I will have to find a way to link these two forms so that I can always, so I'll use the form 1 as my startup form, and then anytime I open form 1, I can always open the form, the new form from there. So these actions here, I can maybe add a file. Then before this, so I'll add open SQL window, right? So in this case, I can move this here just to change their position. So just hold one and just move it over the other to swap the position. So anytime you come here, you can just open the new SQL window. All right. So we will code it, and then we'll see. At least we have done several. We have used that severally, so that's not a new thing. So we now have these two forms. This is our let's say our SQL. So remember, all these would have the names and the text and all those things that we just copied and pasted here. It will have everything, and everything will remain the same and nicely done, right? It is almost the same as just inheriting this form. So once we are done, we can run this form, just run our application. So once we run our application, we can always, so this is our MS Access form, right? So we can come here. So when we code it, we can always stand here and open the SQL window, all right? So that is that for the user interface. So the next thing we do is to try and then write the codes to, first of all, connect to the database and then extract the data and show on this here. When we do that successfully, then we go here and program each of these buttons to be able to navigate and show all the data. And then when we are done with that successfully, then we will now come here and then program Windows, these buttons as to how to add, delete, and update the data that is in the database. So that is about the user interface.